My name's Arjun, and yeah, I'm going to be the chair for this afternoon. I'm a neurodivergent ex-young carer, person of color, second-generation migrant. So for me, the last couple of years has really been about understanding what it means for me to be a designer in those intersections of all those things. And through that, so across my practice, I'm really interested in this idea of the social model of disability as a design provocation. So when we think about the social model as this thing where, people aren't disabled, but their society is disabling, what's the role of design in trying to to critique that and to really put new realities out into the world? So today I've really tried to think about who it is that we might be able to start this conversation with, to think about how we can reimagine the way we think about accessibility to make it something that foregrounds the beauty of it and really makes it something that tries to create new worlds, right, and kind of lead towards a future that might be accessible in different ways, really. I usually exist with many different hats on. So I'm also a co-founder of a studio called Studio Height, where we do a lot of graphic and interaction design work, but thinking about things at the intersection of sustainability, accessibility, community practice, and aesthetics. I'm also 1/3 of a artist-writer designer collective called Access, Power, Visibility with Kaya here. And we're really interested in looking at disability justice and disability rights as a context to make work that reimagines ways of thinking about accessibility and new futures around that. And I'm also a lecturer at Goldsmiths. So all these different hats are kind of different ways to think about accessibility as both a pedagogic tool, thinking about teaching, but also in design. And today I think that's something that we're trying to kind of really work through as well. And so, leading with all that in mind, so there's actually been, I don't know if we can get the slides up, if that'd be all right. Yeah, thank you. Just to kind of give some context for why we're here today talking about these things. So, in the lead up to this festival, there's been 2 projects that have really aligned with this, that myself and the various collaborators I work with have kind of been involved in. The first, just to give some context, is, I don't know if the clicker's working. Thank you, is the Deaths by Welfare project, which some of you may have seen as you come into the entrance here. The Deaths by Welfare project is a project that was started and led by China Mills and John Pring from the Disability News Service. It's just kind of been soft launched now, so feel free to check it out in your own time if you're interested. But essentially it's a timeline of the last 100 years, collating evidence that's shown the way in which welfare reform and welfare state violence has led to the harm and the deaths of disabled people. So we hope that it'll be a tool that helps people understand and use that data as a way to kind of rehearse these types of freedoms in different ways. I'm not going to say a lot about it, but just to give some context, that's kind of something that's led towards this event here today. And also, we go to the next slide as well. Sorry. Yeah, and then also as part of Studio Height, we've been involved in the branding and the visual identity for the Rehearsing Freedoms Festival. And through this, we're really interested in this idea of iteration and rehearsal and thinking about what does it mean to create a festival design that thinks about how we can account for multiple different access needs, and what does it mean to create a festival design that kind of rehearses the types of festivals we want to see in the future. So in this, we worked with different people with different types of access needs to try and produce a visual identity that accounts for all of this and a whole wide range of things. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is to say that, and we can go to the next slide, please, thanks, is that actually across all these projects over the last couple of years, I've been very lucky to talk to a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues, a lot of collaborators, consultants, people who are already thinking about these ideas around accessibility throughout their lives, throughout their work. And so really wanted to use this time just to kind of get these voices together to try and really explore what it means for us to rehearse accessible futures. And so that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, really, is starting to think about, when we think about accessibility, what does it mean to think about that as a craft? What does it mean to kind of foreground the beauty of accessibility, to use it as a medium to kind of reinvent new narratives, reinvent new realities? And if we speculate on what the world might look like in, I don't know how many years' time, what sort of worlds could we be living in if we start to rethink the way we think about accessibility and think about those tools that we work with? And so I'm aware because of time as well, maybe we could just kind of jump straight in, I thought. But actually, just to give a little bit of an outline of the session today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Sohei Lee, we're going to have Zipporah Johnson, and we're going to have Kai Wairia today talk to us about their practice. Probably spend about 10 minutes talking about what it means to operate at that space between an access worker and a creative practitioner who uses accessibility in their work. Really what we're kind of interested in today is like how that creative practice around accessibility can open up new ways to think about accessibility, moving past some of the tools that we're used to seeing today, but also using them in different ways as well. And so we're going to have some time now where each of our amazing panelists will kind of talk through their practice. We'll then take a 15-minute break, and then we'll use the remainder of the time just to have a bit of discussion between us, the Q&A. So if you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to bring up, please use that time to do that, because this is much about us all chatting in person and online as well, and to kind of explore these things together. So I hope that all sounds good. We're very excited to see what comes from this as well. And so to start off with, then, I'm just going to introduce my friend Sohei here. We studied together many years ago, and now it's been great to kind of start to reconnect again after all these years. But Sohei Lee is a deaf South Korean artist based in the UK. Drawing on her personal experience of hearing loss and of being a cochlear implant user, Sohei utilizes multidisciplinary approach to explore a world of sound and silence through mediums of drawing, moving image, and multisensory installation. So thank you, Sohei.
Hi everyone. I'm going to start introduction of myself and also start with visual description of myself as well. I'm wearing all black, black jacket, black trouser, and white T-shirt. And I'm Asian woman in 30s, and I have a short hair bulb. And I will start. My pronouns are she and her. So I'm going to start the presentation to talk about my practice, and I'll be using two of my works as example to talk about access and my approach to the accessibility for the audience and as an artist. And I try my best not to speak too fast. I get nervous really quickly, so I tend to speak too fast. So I'll do my best to take time and talk about my practice. These are the images on my my moving image called Sound and Subtitles, and also my illustration work for Cards for Inclusion. So these are two examples of work I'll be using to discuss my work and show the images of those. And we'll be focusing mostly on the moving image, which I will be talking about use of captions. So these Cards for Inclusion usually work with the Unlimited, which used to be run by Unlimited organization and Art Admin organization. Now it's an independent organization. So they have commissioned me to create the illustrations for Cards for Inclusion, which explore the about how barriers can be removed and also how we can make art more accessible for the audience. And these are the examples of the cards you can see in here with the illustration. And you can see on the barrier, where and what. So what is the item or the artwork that is representing? That could be art installation or paintings or theater performance, which could be, or sound art. And then where would be the location in the middle, where it could be gallery or public spaces or cinema, and then so I had to illustrate like all these individual items together. The thing that most interested me in this project was about barriers mentioned. So that was like a beginning of my journey to kind of start combining and thinking about access and what kind of barriers there are existing that could stopping any people from access to work, or what kind of like barriers can be easily be assumed. These are the whole captured image of like illustrations, like as you can see here, the like assumption that disabled people cannot do things, or the things that the artwork needs to be seen by the blind or low vision users or people with sensory disabilities. So that was really interesting to see like how this barriers existed that I didn't really think about much before, and this commission was entirely all done with the email communication, which was really great for me because this is kind of like start of my working with purely based on email communication, where I didn't have to worry about listening or talking on the conversation so that there wasn't any miscommunications. And I will be moving on to the next project called Sound of Subtitles. That was for the 2021, and that was made with the online residency called Vital Capacities. That was done online over the course of a month period, where you ask to share your process and also make a moving image at the end of the month residency. So that was the first residency I've done online, the way I had to think about showing work online and how I can make the moving image accessible. And so that was, I started to think about the captions. That's when I started exploring how captions can be beautiful and can add interesting elements to the narrative. So I think a lot of misconception there was about caption being like something that is not really, that is dry, just about information giving, and something that is just added at the end of the project, or something that is just not really interesting enough for the audience, for the artist to even consider. So I wanted to kind of use like the format of caption to kind of like playful and also make the moving image story a little bit different. In this one, you can see in this 2 different stills of the subtitles, and where it shows same images across the screen, 3 individual videos showing at the same time, but with 3 different captions. So one of the captions will show the music description, where you kind of up to the individual to understand what the music means to them. And also in the middle is more of a creative captions, where kind of like very abstract. So for example, sound of still silent, how would that sound to one people like me without cochlear implant, just hear absolutely nothing, or ones who is able hearing people, they wouldn't even consider what silent really means. So it was kind of like thought-provoking to some people that I wanted to explore with the language subtitles. And so that was the first time presenting the work in online format, where I had to think about the visual and audio description of the moving image. Also I had to share the process online as well. So that was like, these are screen captures of the work, where I show like my thought process, also what I was researching and reading. So I kind of wanted to like not think of this process not as, it kind of show like a journey itself, to from my beginning of like my frustration with captions and my need for the caption to understand the media and the films around me. So I wanted to kind of like explore that and kind of like bring the beauty of the caption itself, because it's something that you always, I've always grew up with, and wanted to share my experience with it. So this is a piece that's been shown in the physical space, and so I really enjoyed to be able to like bring out some of the caption from the moving image in the physical space. And so I was able to kind of like enhance some of the words floating in space, so that also play across the 3 different screens online as well. This was shown in chapter art space bar, and which was really lovely experience to kind of think about how I can bring this offline as well, and have these words floating, and also not just contained within the online platform.
Could you read a little bit what the words say?
Oh, sure. Yeah, some of the words are saying holding and forming, creating, shaping, building, and crafting. So one of the videos was showing individually in terms of action-based, and then the middle one was abstract-based, and then the other one was music-based. So as you can see in the very corner in here, there are 3 asterisks in here. So I wanted to share my experience with music experience on the films. Some of the music are not even described and not even like show lyrics or the title of the song, or so sometimes they are just basically in asterisk, so no one really knows what is being played. So I would kind of want to bring out that into the film, into the moving image, and show like it's up to you what you think is being played, and also the music description that's being described are like quite broad and could be like, you know, orchestra music and there's like somber music. So I wanted to kind of like bring the experience of music to individuals who have different experience with it. For me, I don't really have much experience in music, so I did not grow up with pop music culture. So I kind of wanted to kind of think about like what broad range of music I could have described to people who have different experiences. Yeah, so I think also this film was also made in audio description as well. So it's really interesting to see how the moving image can lack in artist world, to see like not many captions are being shown, and also some of the moving images can have open caption, which means it's embedded caption. Closed caption means it could be taken off and turned on easily. So it was quite interesting to see how some artists show the way how they add the caption, make a decision to style of the caption, and then explore the language caption. But it's still a lot of moving images are lack those captions. So I think I wanted to kind of like promote the use of caption, how it can just be beautiful and really enjoyable experience, want to read and watch as well. So yeah, I'm working on another moving image with the caption, so hopefully I'll be able to show in the future to the public. So yeah, I think that's the end of the presentation. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sohei. I think there's lots of really beautiful things to start to kind of think about in regards to seeing subtitles as a craft, the comparison between ceramics, this idea of hands molding form, I guess, and then at the same time what it means for subtitles to mold a narrative. I think that's really, really beautiful. And actually, what does it mean for us to then think about subtitles as something that carries a different layer in terms of how people understand the work and how we can do that in a way that's intentional and beautiful and creative as well. So it's really interesting how you're playing with abstraction, playing with the kind of the practical description of something, but also that space in between where understanding is made. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
We can go through that some more in the Q&A as well. Amazing. All right, so moving on, we're now going to introduce Zipporah Johnson, who's with us online via Zoom. Can you hear us okay, Zipporah?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. So, 1 second. So Zipporah is an embroiderer and visual artist based in Edinburgh. Her textile work explores the complexities of autistic experience, particularly monotropism, the autistic tendency to focus deeply on one thing at a time. Zipporah is also the founder of Nuke Collective, a neurodivergent art collective, and its parent CIC, Door in the Wall Arts Access. This works for a more inclusive creative sector in Scotland and is underpinned by the belief that disabled and neurodivergent people are the experts in their own experience. She has a particular interest in neuro-inclusive communication, including easy read and other visual supports. So thank you so much, Zipporah. We'll hand it over to you.
Can everyone see a pair of rather alarming eyes? See a couple of pairs of rather alarming eyes. Slideshow. Yeah. Okay. So as Arjun said, I am an embroiderer. I'm an illustrator and access worker. My practice is making these embroidered sculptures, kind of three-dimensional stump work embroideries. And I started embroidering in a really serious way after I was diagnosed as autistic in my late 20s. And a lot of my work has been about coming to terms with that and kind of finally understanding why I found everything so hard. So, for example, this piece here is about eye contact and how difficult I find eye contact. But I am also really interested in finding ways to talk about autism that don't foreground distress. So a lot of my work is actually about monotropism, which is the tendency of autistic brains to focus intensely on one thing at a time. as opposed to kind of juggling multiple competing stimuli or sources of information. So on the one hand, that means that we are not natural multitaskers, and that obviously can pose challenges. But on the other hand, it means that we have these deep, all-consuming interests that we hyper-focus on and that bring us a lot of joy. So, for me, that's bees and moths and collecting amulets and charms. And I made a whole installation about it called the Museum of Monotropism. That's over here. And, for me, this is a source of real pleasure and flow, that kind of state of deep focus. And I want to celebrate that in my work. And it's also important to me that my art is accessible to other people. So when I did this installation, access was really foregrounded in the entire exhibition. We had a lot of access tools available. We had audio versions of everything, and we had multiple formats of the different kind of information that was part of the installation. So alongside my embroidery practice, I do access work. So I run Nook Collective, as Arjun was saying. It's a collective for Scottish neurodivergent artists. We advocate and create opportunities for neurodivergent people working or trying to work in the arts and the creative industries. And I'm also the director of our parent, CIC, our community interest company, Door in the Wall. And through that, I write and illustrate easy read documents. And easy read is a format. I put a little diagram here on the right-hand side of what a page of easy read looks like. It's a format that uses easy words and pictures to make information accessible for people with learning disabilities. And I also write and illustrate various other like visual resources that support neurodivergent people to access the arts. And I do see all of these strands of my work as interconnected. So my access work comes out of being an artist and out of the experience of trying to function as a disabled neurodivergent person in an industry that feels like it's just not really made for people like me, both in terms of the structural factors that make a career in the arts really difficult for people whose brain works differently from the norm, or who struggle with pain and fatigue and neurological symptoms from my other conditions. So the admin, the long hours, the precarity of the arts, and the dependence on networking are all real barriers. And also, though, it is also in terms of the way that you do get put into a box as a neurodivergent artist. There is often a narrative in the art world, that they want from you of the tormented, suffering, disabled artist. But my life is not terrible, and my autism is not a tragedy. And I don't want my work or the work of other neurodivergent people to be flattened and stripped of nuance or forced into a stereotype. So, those neurotypical expectations are another kind of access barrier, I think, to working in the arts. For me, there has been something really wonderful about creating for other neurodivergent people, because it's like I'm being allowed to let my brain work in the way that it naturally wants to, but it isn't normally allowed. So I actually feel that it's a real asset to be autistic when you're creating easy read or visual aids, because it's essentially the process that I've been doing my whole life on the down low, taking the chaos and the overwhelm and abstraction of the neurotypical world, and translating it into something that I can actually hold. So just as an example, this is a visual schedule that I created for the Edinburgh Fringe earlier this year. And it was really informed by my own experiences with processing information, especially when I was growing up and I hadn't maybe developed as many of the coping strategies that I have now. So I've used things that help me to reduce sensory or cognitive overload. So simple illustrations, color coding, repeated motifs, so that you have predictability and recognition, and a low stim color palette. And I really tried to put care for the end user at its heart, because I think sometimes neurotypical designers come at things with like a grand artistic vision, and the actual needs of the neurodivergent user are secondary to that. And the result is something that might look really sleek, but it's uncomfortable to use. And the neurodivergent person at the end of the process just hasn't been considered. And I think that's kind of a metaphor for where we are generally with accessibility in the arts. In a lot of places, it is still an afterthought. So your access is now being built into funding frameworks, but that doesn't actually mean that organizations are actually centering the needs of disabled people or bringing us in as equal partners. A lot of organizations are still treating accessibility as a box to tick, or as a kind of a garnish that you can sprinkle on at the end once you've already cooked up your program. But actually, access it's more like baking a cake. If 10 minutes from the end, when it's due to be taken out the oven, you realize, oh, I forgot to add the butter. It's too late at that point. It's not going to work. It has to be baked in. And so if you want your programs to be accessible to disabled people, if you want anything to be accessible to disabled people, you need to design with their needs in mind from the very start. So in terms of what I would like to see for the future, it's more than just window dressing. I would like to see accessibility truly embedded in projects from the start, not bodged in at the end. And I would also love to see co-production with disabled people becoming the standard. So that if you are planning a project, you would ask disabled people to do that with you. Ask them what would make this accessible for you, and then you design around that. And in terms of how we get there, I would really love to see more encouragement for disabled leadership. And disabled people are already leading the way in pressing for change, and in building supportive communities and in creating resources to help one another navigate the unfairness of the art world or of the world generally. But these efforts are not being consistently supported. So there have been really great projects that have lost funding and disappeared. And it's really hard to make sustained change when everything is so precarious. So we really need funders to commit long-term to disabled-led projects and disabled-led organizations. Just supporting them to be sustainable so that we can actually see that long-term progress that we need. And I also think there needs to be a shift in attitude from access as a static checklist that you kind of go through at the end, to be like, right, yep, I've done the easy read now, towards it being a process of continual improvement and learning. And, funders need to be brave and allow space to experiment and space to fail, because that's how innovation happens. And we do need to acknowledge that we are all going to make mistakes, and be gracious to ourselves and to others when we inevitably mess up or we are less than perfect. And also to acknowledge that not everything is going to work for everyone, and that's okay. What is accessible for me isn't necessarily going to be accessible for you. But if we have a diversity of opportunities, there will be something for everyone.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Zipporah. Can you hear us okay? Oh, can you hear us? Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much, Zipporah. That was fantastic. I think you touched on so many amazing points there. Everything from thinking about accessibility in relation to baking a cake. You're right that we need more than window dressing, and we shouldn't be adding it in the last second in the process of making a cake. Also, this whole thing around experimenting with access and creating space to get it wrong and space to learn, and that's how new forms of accessibility come from that. I think you're totally right, and maybe that's something that we can discuss a bit more in our conversation later in terms of how do we make space for that. What do we practically need to do to be able to experiment with accessibility? Because often it feels like we need to get it right now, which we do, but also if we're trying to reimagine new futures around accessibility, then we need space to explore that. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your energy, and that was really great. Amazing. Okay, so leading on to our next panel discussion is Kaya Wairia. Kaya is a chronically ill writer, designer, and publisher from Ayatora, now living in London. Her research is concerned with knowledge produced through marginalization, particularly as it is produced through moving through this world in a disabled and indigenous body. Her writing has been featured in Counter Signals 5, Systems and Their Discontents, forthcoming, Errant Journal, and Learning from Our Ancestors, AIGAI on Design, and others. Kaya co-runs feminist press Sticky Fingers Publishing and teaches on the graphic design program at Camberwell UAL. So thank you so much for your time. Really grateful to have you here. And I'll hand over to Kaya.
Thank you. Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Kaya Wairia. My pronouns are she, her. And to give a visual description, I'm a young, white-appearing woman with frizzy brown hair tied up. I'm wearing a grey jumper and an orange neck scarf. As Arjun said, I'm a chronically ill writer, designer, and publisher from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I've lived in London for 8 years, where I now teach on the graphic design program at Camberwell University of the Arts, London. I also run a feminist print publisher, next slide please, called Sticky Fingers Publishing. Work as a freelance writer, next slide please. They're not all going to be this quick, this will be over soon. And designer, next slide please, thank you. I'm also 1/3 of the collective Access Power Visibility with Arjun here. And I've also worked as a kind of one-to-one support worker and done a bit of access consultancy with design studios as well. Cool, so next slide, please. I wanted to start by conjuring this idea of disability scholar Rosemary Garland-Thompson's misfits. Garland-Thompson coins the term misfits to describe the co-constitutional, the thing which doesn't fit, and the thing which isn't fitted into produce each other, and the contingent, contextually specific relationship that misfit describes. So she elaborates that misfit or misfitting also implies a politics of resourcefulness, of creative trouble causing, and of dynamic badness. So we're all here because we know we live in a world that isn't designed for us. In our misfitting, there's potential to not only cause a kind of anti-capitalist and anti-colonial kind of trouble, but through this troubling to generate new possible configurations. To be disabled is to practice this kind of resourcefulness to produce these new configurations in the living of our everyday lives. So with this attitude in mind, I'm going to give an overview of 3 different projects which, through actively interweaving access work and creative practice, begin to rehearse accessible futures. Cool, next slide, please. So I'm going to start with this publication, which is called Innovative Healthcare or Chocolate with Nuts. This publication brought together some of my ongoing explorations into the materiality of support and ableist aesthetics as they're dealt out from the state and medical institutions via bureaucratic processes and pop culture. Next slide, please. So the publication itself is made up of 3 parts. The first, screenshots from the cartoons I grew up watching, where the characters received medical interventions. The second, reproductions of monograph prints of my Department for Work and Pensions workplace assessment forms. And the third was a piece of writing, which I'm going to read an excerpt from. So it says, "The cartoons I grew up watching were full of scenes that depicted the use of medical equipment, treatment, or mobility aids. Reasons why included as a form of disguise for monetary gain, to create mystique, as the result of misunderstanding or coercion, comic relief, or because they had an injury intentionally inflicted upon them. In this last case, the impairments have usually been inflicted by the protagonist, the aid being a sign of villainhood." Support means held from below, but to survive in this world, you also need support from above. There's a kind of vertigo in this, a gravitational switcheroo that sends us flying, faith, trust, and pixie dust, up to meet the hands that feed. Spoiler, they don't actually feed. Upon impact, our bodies splatter messily across the surface of bureaucracy, leaving nothing but bloody traces across the documents which are meant to hold us. The pixels that make up these screenshots of our lives are damaged, glitched, and bruised, sinking back down from the heights we only dare attempt when desperate. A couple of years ago, slides were leaked from a presentation given by a doctor to the government's long COVID committee, outlining the, quote, secondary gain of being disabled. Maybe some of you remember this. These included, quote, support, care, and attention from family, friends, and carers, excuse for avoidance, example of unwanted sexual attention, social mystique or importance, such as having a rare condition, end quote. I guess a lot of doctors grew up watching the same cartoons as me. Cool. I'm going to move on to another project now, and hopefully we can discuss all of these together at the end. Thank you. Cool. So the next project I want to talk to you about is a workshop that I ran at Somerset House Studios called Making and Holding a Crypt Planetarium. In this workshop, we used image making, collage, and assemblage to construct constellations of crypt futurity. Thinking through the everyday objects and materials that make up our lived experiences, we challenged the erasure of disabled people from our social vistas and horizons, and thought through both the potential and the limits of image making to hold what it means for us to be. So, inspired by the works of science fiction writers like Octavia E. Butler and works on crypt futurity like Alison Kafer, we thought and made through key questions such as, next slide, please. What particular knowledge does your lived experience of disability or illness reveal to you about the world? How can we center these knowledges in our collective future making? What enables you to participate in the future? How do we negotiate having conflicting or contradictory access needs? What does it look like to construct visual systems that hold difference and multitude? And how do we negotiate conflicting dreams and desires? Next slide, please. In this session, we began by writing a list of objects which gave us access to the future. Printing pictures of these objects off live in the session, we then collaged this material with photocopied references from a book called Cosmographics by Michael Benson, a book which documents the history of how we've visualized outer space. Next slide, please. So participants in pairs or trios collaged into fragments of a geodesic dome. Throughout the session, I brought different clusters together, getting participants to consider, next slide, please. How do you visually negotiate moments of joining? Do you want to integrate your group's work with another's where they meet, or do you want the edges of your group's collage to end clearly in relation to the others? How are the meanings of images changing as they're made increasingly in relation to other images? Next slide, please. Eventually, the dome was fully formed, and we sat beneath it discussing what we had made, telling each other about different elements we had worked on, and reflecting on how we all access the future. Cool. I'm going to move on to one final project, which is a resource called Access Questions for Self-Publishing. So Access Questions for Self-Publishing is a print pamphlet and online resource created to enable my students primarily, but also anyone, to begin thinking about what accessibility means within self and independent publishing. This featured interviews with Olivia Spring, Abby Palmer, and Dee Mortimer. So this document collates questions, prompts, and considerations for expanding and clarifying what we might mean by accessibility within self and independent publishing. Primarily, this document uses the term access in the context of barriers caused by ableism, although these barriers inherently overlap and intersect with barriers caused by racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and classism. Next slide, please. This resource is not a checklist or how-to guide. Instead of being a replicable a replicable template, it hopes to enable you to think about accessibility in a contingent and specific way, most relevant to your work, project, publication, press, or interests. Having conversations about access is messy and nuanced. Access needs change and can change rapidly. Two people's needs might completely contradict each other. Someone's comfort might be someone else's distress. Beginning these conversations can feel scary and restrictive, but not to have them is to willingly cause these forms of harm to continue. What we can do, even with no financial support or institutional backing, is enter these discussions with joy for the futures that they make possible, the relationships they open up, and the vital knowledge that they allow to be nurtured and circulated. Next slide, please. So there are 10 sections: roles and hierarchies, communication, cost and value, time, writing, editing, and design and production, and then finally press and distribution. Each made up of 100 words introducing the idea, 3 questions for thinking through this idea, and then up to 3 links to further resources. So this format was intended to provide a digestible and scalable way to work through these complex discussions. Next slide, please. And this just shows some of the different formats that are available to download from the website, and I'm hoping to add audio this year. That's my plan. Cool. Next slide. I think that's the end. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kaya. I think across that, there's so many really nice ideas that we can start to think about as well. You know, if there's this idea of support coming from below and then also from above, and how it doesn't always feed us, you know, thinking about what does it mean for us to approach this with grassroots approaches to accessibility. You know, what can we do in our own ways to reimagine different futures? And if we're trying to gain access to that future, who's establishing that? And how do we make our own versions? Particularly like this idea of thinking about, you know, where do our dreams conflict and where do they align? I think that really aligns with this festival, right? The whole idea of rehearsal is about iteration. And so we need iterations of different futures, iterations of different dreams, and then how do these things connect? And it's the space in between that I think is the realm that accessibility can operate within, which for me is quite exciting. So yeah, thank you for that. And so what I think we're going to do now is, one thing I want to do is, unfortunately, VJ can't be with us today, but I'm just going to read their bio for you now anyway, and I'm going to encourage you all to check out their website, because VJ's an amazing person, and you should all check their work out. And then what we'll do is we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll do a bit of a discussion and a Q&A, if that sounds good. Great. Oh my gosh, I've got so many bits of paper. Give me 1 second. Great. So Vijay Patel is a performance artist, writer, and neurodivergent access consultant. He crosses forms from live art, performance art, and queer club/cabaret. The work they make predominantly surrounds cultural identity, making autobiographical/political work to shift perceptions and uplift marginalized and intersectional identities. So check out Vijay's website. We'll make sure it's on the YouTube link as well, so everyone can check that out. And I know you'll all love it. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll get started again with some discussions and Q&A. Amazing. Well, yeah, thank you so much again to Sohei, Kaya, and Zipporah. I think like the conversation so far has been so amazing in terms of aligning and revealing these different types of futures that we're trying to aim for, whether that's thinking about how we think about accessibility as a craft, thinking about how that then opens up different types of futures. And yeah, so I think actually when we're thinking about this idea of play, I think is really interesting, because I mean, Zipporah spoke about this idea of like having the freedom to experiment and be brave with accessibility in terms of thinking about new ways to do it. I think you mentioned, Zipporah, that that's where innovation comes from, and then at the same time, Sohei spoke about this idea of play in terms of different games, and Kaya spoke about this idea of joy in accessibility, and that's also where freedom comes from, where it doesn't feel like it's something that has to be done, but it's something that we really want to do, and I think that's why we're all here today, right? And so maybe with that, maybe there's a question to think about in terms of when we think about what it means to design with joy in mind. I mean, maybe it's a question for you, Kaya, like what do you think the next steps are to kind of ensure that things are made in a joyful way, I guess, or maybe is that a helpful question?
So I think that part of what Zipporah was actually saying about the narratives that are expected from you as a disabled practitioner to kind of perform when you get a commission or a job or whatever, often is a kind of tragic role. And I think that that's kind of why shifting either the narrative or the aesthetic system that we tell our own stories through, kind of away from that into other types of spaces, can be really generative as a way to unsettle the stories that are put upon us by institutions and society and so on. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does, and thank you for the caveat. You're totally right. You know, that isn't always the best way to approach things, but this relationship between joy and accessibility is perhaps an interesting way to help start to think about these new ways of thinking about the future. And so maybe, I think one question I had for everybody that I thought maybe we could each go through and kind of touch on between us, because so far we've seen how each person is already starting to speculate on the types of futures we want to see come into being, and sometimes this idea of speculation, action is the hard thing after it, right? We imagine new futures, but then like, what are those next steps that could come from it? So maybe my first question is really like, what is the value of speculation and imagination in thinking about approaches to accessibility? And maybe I could ask each of you to kind of say something around that. Maybe we'll go to you first, Zipporah, if that's okay.
Sure, sorry, let me unmute myself. No, I think I always feel this sort of push-pull because I have quite a practical brain, and also, you know, a lot of access things, they feel very urgent because people are not able to do now. And so there is part of me that's kind of like practical solutions. But I think there are still areas where we don't really have solutions. And you need to give people that space to dream, to think about, okay, you know, none of our paradigms are working right now. What's the alternative? And I think if it's always, you know, if the commission or whatever is always like create a practical resource to use, then you lose the potential for those kind of out of the box ideas that might seem crazy now, but actually 20 years down the line, they're going to have transformed the way that we think about things.
Thank you, Zipporah. Yeah, no, I think you're totally right, and that's really beautifully put, better than I could have put it, in terms of this dynamic between jumping between the practical and the imaginary. The space to dream, I think, is really, really important to think about. So, hey, do you want to say something about that as well?
Yeah, I think thinking about this practical element, I think when I am approached to do projects or asked to do something, and I think about like how the access, the need for the access for myself and for the audience as well. So I think it's really important to be able to just ask what's available and what we do. And I think also it's important to take time as well. I think it's also because, especially with access workers and this arranging for these things takes time. I think it's really important to arrange that and include that in the conversation, include like, you know, I mean, from the beginning of everything, and then kind of make sure that happens whenever it needs to happen. So I think it's really important to be able to kind of like not to add those things last minute, I think, because that's so easy to kind of like, and also it's really, really hard and takes a long time to book the BSL interpreter or live captioning time and as well. So I think it's important to be able to consider these access elements in the beginning, and also when it comes to making captions for the project, I think it's really nice to kind of think about that from the beginning rather than just slap on it at the end, and thinking about, I think, what captions can do for your work rather than thinking what I have to do to just add at the end kind of thing. So I think it's really nice to think the potential of captions and what you can do rather than something being annoying that is in the way of seeing things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, we can see that through your work, right? You know, your work uses captions to tell a narrative, but also you took it off the screen and suddenly it's around the room and it takes a different meaning and a different life by dreaming up that space as well. So definitely. And you, Kaya, this thing about speculation and imagination, what do you think the value of that is?
Yeah, I guess, I suppose to slightly echo what others have said, it's like the kind of ability to fluctuate between scales of thinking and the ability to fluctuate between contexts of kind of practical, real life context and kind of imaginary future or kind of otherworldly context is what design practice is so adept at, like that, you know, and it's in that way that I think that these creative practices are not just a kind of nice way to think about these things, but are like truly necessary to do that work. And the kind of the scale of or the kind of space of speculation is kind of necessary for us to be able to expand what is possible, what's imaginable, all of these kind of things, like the edges of our societal imaginary, how we can keep pushing it at those boundaries. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. That's really interesting about this idea of scales of thinking and context. And I guess the whole festival is this idea of rehearsing freedom so that when we're ready for it, we've got the plan and we can take it and put it in action. So this whole thing of imagining context for thinking about accessibility is the same, right? So we can practice it and rehearse in different ways. And then when we get to that point, it becomes a thing in the world. And so maybe with that in mind, I might ask one second question and then I'm going to open up to the room and to online. So please feel free to think about if you have any questions you want to ask. But so thinking about this idea of speculation and imagination, my next question really for each of you is this thing of how do we move from speculation to action? Or what are the difficulties with that? Or what are the things that are important to consider with that? And so maybe I'll start with you, Kai. Or we can pass it around.
Could someone else answer first?
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Are you okay to go first, Sephora?
I can certainly try. I think some of it is going to be about money. I know that's really dull, but because it's about decisions about what we fund and decisions about what we support. And so I think that at the moment, part of the reason that we don't have kind of innovative ideas necessarily coming out of big arts organizations or organizations generally is because there aren't many disabled people in them. And so, you know, what the angle that they're coming at from is we're making X, how do we like bolt on access? So for me, actually physically getting disabled people into those spaces is really important. And that's going to take the money to actually support disabled people in the workplace, because it can be more expensive. Doesn't have to be always, but sometimes it can be. And you know, if you're going to build in longer time scales, if you're going to build in rest time and all that kind of thing, you have to accept that actually you're going to have to change your funding priorities. And also, you know, just allowing disabled people to lead on projects and accept that it might not work out as well. Like I think sometimes at the moment, when you're finally, you know, it's so hard to get money to try something out, and when you finally get it, it's like this better work because you know otherwise no other disabled person is ever going to be offered a commission by this company again, and like that's an incredibly pressured way to work, and it's also it's a nonsense. Like, you know, innovation isn't going to happen that way because people will always be safe. So yeah, I would sort of be about, for me it's about changing priorities and putting your money where your mouth is when you say you want to support disabled people. So actually you're going to have to do it.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I think this idea of relieving expectations of time, of processes, of all these sorts of things is a really good way to free up the space to think in this way. So hey.
Yeah, I think it's really easy for the organization when they arrange events or the panel discussion. I think it's easy for them to kind of oversee, have short-sighted with the access needs. I think it's really good to just ask questions and see, raise the questions and what kind of access needs there is to provide for the people. Yeah, so I think it's just ask and make sure that it's, you know, like not, of course, it's quite tricky to ask in last minute, of course, because it takes time to organize. So I think it's good to like just ask in advance from the beginning, and so that it allows the organization or groups to organize the access needs as well.
Thank you. Kai?
Yeah, I guess a kind of like individual scale, of moving from speculation to action, I think kind of getting into practices of being honest with yourself about what you're actually able to do. I think when it's quite easy for it to feel overwhelming to even begin actioning any of this in your work or in your workplace or in the way you live your life and the way you relate to your friends and so on. But I think kind of getting into the habit of actually just kind of double checking with yourself, like, is that actually beyond my capabilities, or could I actually just decide to do that? You know, could I be the one that brings this up in conversation? Could I be the one that says this thing to my friend? Could I be the one that adds a point to the agenda in my work meeting? You know, just these kinds of things, and finding those opportunities to like give yourself permission as well, I think is part of it.
Amongst the collective, and also how's it this giving yourself the space to dream and to experiment, but then how do you then convert that into tasks that can kind of happen? You're right, it's like something that takes time and takes support and takes all these other mechanisms, so lots of really interesting things to start to think about there. We had one question online, which maybe I'll bring to you, Zipporah, if that's okay. So the question is, how to involve disabled people within design processes without making it feel extractive, especially in no funding projects. So maybe we can also pass that around as well, but if that's okay with you, Zipporah, I might hand over to you first.
Yeah, sure. So I think paying, again, I'm going to keep going back to money, but I think paying people is part of it. I don't think it's the whole story. But for instance, when I'm doing Easy Read, I work with a group of testers with Down syndrome, and I pay them because what they're doing is labor, and it's a way of saying that we are equal partners in this. I start out thinking with them about what it is that we're going to do, and then they're going to read through the finished Easy Read or the first draft of the Easy Read, and they'll make their comments and come back. And the thing that really depresses me about a lot of Easy Read is that those testers work for free in a lot of places, because it's seen as like, well, this is for your benefit, and okay, it might be ultimately for their benefit, but other people also have jobs where they get benefit, and that society gets benefit, and they're still expected to be paid. So for starters, like this is labor, like recognize it as labor. And also I think sometimes when people talk about it, we collaborated with disabled people on this project, or we consulted disabled people on this project. Did you really, or did you like hold one focus group where you like showed a PowerPoint and gave them like 3 options, and none of them were actually the options that they wanted, but they only had those 3 options to choose? I mean, I used to be quite involved in autistic politics in Scotland, and I would go to these sort of groups where you'd be told, oh, we want to build this with you. We want you to co-design it with us. And you'd get there and they'd have 3 prototypes and you had to choose. And that's not really meaningful co-production. Like, you have to get people in at the beginning. And again, like, you treat it as labor. If the designer in the room is getting paid, then the disabled people in the room who are talking about the design should also get paid.
Yeah, thank you, Zipporah. No, I think it's really interesting to think about different models of collaboration, and some are definitely more extracted than others, and it's like, how do you come to it with a sense of transparency and openness in terms of what does it really mean to work with, not for disabled people? Like everyone, the phrase "nothing about us without us." So I think, there's something really interesting there to kind of hold on to. Is there anything that either of you would like to add, Kai or Zoe?
I'd maybe just add that. This isn't really answering the question, but it's kind of related, which is that in situations where you don't have any money, being just really honest about what access you're not providing as well. can just help people make decisions about, especially I'm thinking in the context of events, I suppose, like if you're putting on an event and you don't have any funding for it, so you can't have interpreters or caption writers or some of these things, then just including that in your access info so that people know what to expect when they come and can make mindful decisions about what they're kind of entering into. So yeah, I think just being in those habits of communicating what you can and can't provide as well. I can see Sephora's got her hand up.
Okay, sorry. No, just to totally agree with what you were saying. And also that I think that part of this is about like the attitude, because people quite often don't put that information on their website because they're worried. They're like embarrassed that they can't provide those things. So they think it's better to cover it up, and it's not. So part of that is about being more forgiving and understanding that like somebody with 500 quid from the Arts Council is not the same as the Tate, and we're not asking for the same things.
That's really good. Thank you, Sephora. And so, hey.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like, as an artist, I think if you're working in organization or the galleries, if they when we talk about access needs, I think it's very common for them not to know any organization they can work with in terms of access. So I think it's really good to know to have like names or resources to share as well. So I'll recommend BSL interpreter or recommend which live captioning organization they can use as well. So I think it's a good start for them to start from that point.
Definitely. Thank you. And maybe what I'll do is I'll give the opportunity for anyone in the room if they have any questions you'd like to ask or any thoughts. Oh, yeah. Shall we go to Ned and then we'll go to Fran? Sounds good.
Thank you. I thought I'd just ask quickly a little question for everyone is sort of in your experience over the last few years, what are the ways in which you've seen arts organisations or industries who have either given you commissions or collaborated with you, how have you seen that improve? Are there any instances where you feel like things have changed for the better significantly, and if so, where? And yeah, I just thought, yeah, I'd see how things are sort of like changing in real time, sort of positively.
Great, thank you. So yeah, the question was, have we seen anywhere within the last few years where arts organisations are starting to improve in terms of their ways of thinking about accessibility?
I think especially COVID times, I think it was definitely the COVID time where it started to more online meetings and also hybrid meetings as well. So I think that's when I started seeing more, I guess, more in demand for to provide those services. I think, but unfortunately now it's kind of like COVID cases going down a little bit, and I can definitely see way less access happening online, and it's becoming more in-person meetings. So I think it's just a bit of frustrating to see that.
Yeah, I just echo that. I think that there was a couple of years where it was fashionable for art commissioners to support this kind of work, and that's going out of fashion again. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
I don't know, Sephora, if there's anything you want to add to that.
I think you're right, Kaya, that the art world has a short attention span, and it's a bit kind of flavor of the month in terms of what they focus on. I am seeing smaller organizations, though, really like some of the small galleries up here, really starting to take it seriously. And I think the amazing thing for them is that they quite often have very little choice about the venues that they use, because we don't have a lot of, especially in Edinburgh, we don't have a lot of exhibition spaces here, and the ones that we do have are, it's a very medieval city, so they're often really not accessible, but they are actually off their own back, doing things like sensory maps, doing access guides, doing visual stories. So I don't know that it's necessarily the big organizations that are leading on this. It tends to be smaller ones, in my experience.
Thank you, Sport.
That's a really interesting reflection, and I do think it is important, the things have been highlighted as well, to mention that disabled people have been fighting and campaigning for these changes to the ways in which we access spaces long before COVID happened, and so making sure that those sorts of things stay in place afterwards is definitely something that maybe isn't happening across the board, but perhaps in these smaller places, like you said, Zipporah, where we're seeing artists or kind of smaller arts organizations and other organizations doing this in their own way, I think is something to look to. And maybe there's a way we can collate some resources to try and see who's doing this and try and share it around as another time. Yeah, Fran.
Question for everyone. It was so interesting to see all of your different projects and hear about your practice. And I guess my question is, like, where do you see your work going next? Like, what would you love to do?
Go around. Like, I don't know if each of you want to say a bit about where you see your projects going next. What's the next thing that you're looking to explore?
As a practice, as artist.
Is your practice, yeah.
Yeah, I think I just finished working on the moving image that explored caption and audio description and creative caption. So I'm hoping I will be able to make more of the moving image in the future to kind of promote the use of the captions. Yeah, not just for access, but also for the enjoying for the public in general. So yeah, so that's my future at the moment.
Question. I think right now I'm trying to figure out how to do this work in a way that's sustainable for me in the context of my life, which maybe isn't the kind of answer that you're after, but is the honest one. So thinking about how I can find ways to organize my life that feel good and mean that I'm spending my time on the things that feel urgent to me. So yeah, I guess just continuing to work on that because it's difficult. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you. And Zipporah? Do you want to answer that question as well?
Yeah, sort of similar to Kaya, to be honest, but and a kind of more, well, partly in my own scale, but also on an organizational scale. During the Wall MOOC, we are kind of at a bit of a turning point where I'm trying to find ways to make our work sustainable. We are going to be taking on staff, and there is something about, we're kind of forced to work on this neurotypical timescale. And I would really like to see how we can build something that doesn't. So, I think it's actually really important, Kaya, that we find ways for disabled artists to exist in the system, in this neurotypical, fast-paced, burn yourself out kind of world that is not accessible for us. So it is actually important to think about ways that we make things sustainable for individuals. And I think that as you get more, like, we're going to be an organization that's going to be entirely made up of disabled people. And so it is like, that's a real challenge to think about, how do we make that sustainable? How do we make sure that the system that we build like holds everyone? And I think that that's something that we need to crack generally, in order that disabled people can stay in the industry in whatever capacity, as like administrators, as artists. Is okay, how do we actually step outside that that paradigm that we're all stuck in, and we're all running around on our little hamster wheels, and how do we step off?
Amazing. Oh, thank you, Zipporah. Sadly, I feel like we've come to the end of it. Oh, unless, do you think we can squeeze one more question in? No. Yeah, okay, we're going to go for it.
Sorry, I didn't realise we'd come to the end already. It was so fascinating. I wondered, one first question is whether, Zipporah, you could say a little bit more about your Museum of Monotropism, because we only saw this tiny picture, and I would really love to know more and to hear more about it. And secondly, which was really the question, you've answered it a little bit, but I've been reading John Locke, right, his Treatise of Government, and actually his conception of his lack of understanding for land and social interaction. Like the value is only in the productivity that can be made from the land or the labor of people. And so that the sense of a social imaginary that we're all living is kind of still designed by him, or we're still living that overproductiveness. And so I just wondered these strategies and tools for how to be the generousness of less productivity. You know, how to feel like that's like a basic, not not an extra. And so how I just those and something that everybody will benefit from, like it's not working for anyone now. So I just had the sort of question I'm working towards was if you could all say a little bit more about those tools for that kind of generosity.
Sounds fantastic. I mean, I love all those ideas around tools of generosity, and yeah, how do we? Yeah. Oh well, let's get straight into it. That sounds good. If that's okay for time. Yeah. Okay. Great. So maybe first we'll come to you, Zipporah, in terms of just expanding a bit more on what the Museum of Monotropism was, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I caught very much of the questions. Sorry, it was quite distorted. Was the question that you wanted to know about the museum?
Yeah, sorry, we'll handle it in two parts maybe. So about just expand a bit on what the Museum of Monotropism was, and then we'll come to the other question after.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, no, it was. I mean, it's going to be in Todmorden next year. So if you happen to live in Yorkshire, you'll be able to see it. But the idea is that it's a kind of an installation that's like the museum of my brain. Like I often feel that my brain feels a bit like the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, if anyone's ever been there, where one half is natural history, the Natural History Museum, and then the other half is the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is this anthropological museum where you'll go in and there's just like cabinets of the same object, but like with tiny variations, all, you know, like 500 chimarutas all in a case together. And then on the other hand, there are these drawers where you open it and it's like, you know, folk magic, and you open it and there's like a 19th century Italian shrine next to a giant preserved toad from somewhere in Middle East, next to like a witch bottle from 17th century England, and to that person that did the collecting, that made perfect sense that they would all go in, but to the modern eye, like, why would you put those objects together? And I often feel my brain is a bit like that kind of I do combine random objects together, and it makes sense to me, but it's difficult to explain to neurotypical people. So that's kind of the idea of that installation. And you can see it on my website if you're interested. I don't want to talk too much because I'm aware we're at the end. Sorry. Was there a second question? I wasn't sure.
We'll definitely have to go check out the show when it's up. And so the second question, please tell me if I'm misinterpreting, but it's something about how can we develop and understand strategies for countering productivity, right? And how that becomes a basic that we all have. And so how do we see that as a tool to create space to think about these things around accessibility, or how that is an as a tool for accessibility anyway, right? Not having to be productive. Is that correct? Okay. Do you want to go first, Kai, maybe, or I can pass to anyone else?
Okay, way to answer this. So I'm quite interested in the idea of idleness. So as opposed to thinking about rest as a way, is often something that we do in order to then become productive again, thinking about how we can make space to just be idle, where we're kind of maybe doing similar activities to what we might do when we're resting, but without any purpose. And I think that that's something that I really try and think about if I've kind of made space for at the end of my week. Like, have I had any time to just be idle? Usually the answer is no, but kind of being aware of that and trying to make that space within my life is kind of an ongoing thing I'm thinking about. So that's kind of a kind of personal level sort of answer to that question.
For me, I think I felt to reflect the word idleness. I think I struggle with it quite a lot because I think in order to make my practice sustainable, I feel like I constantly have to think about what I'm doing, what I'm going to do, and then, like, think about those things. I think, I feel like I definitely do need like that time, a period where I feel like I can just have not think about having that pressure myself too much about that need to be productive, because productivity, I guess, is easy to think is you have to be making something, but I guess also thinking about something. And I think I'm hoping that I'm hoping that I can like figure out the way to like learn how to be productive, but without having to feel the pressure in that sense, I think. But hopefully I'm able to like take a good Christmas break. So so hopefully so I think it's difficult, I think, because as an artist, I think, because I feel like I'm not going to be able to make this sustainable practice if I don't do anything. I think it's such an easy pressure to have.
Thank you. And support.
That's a really interesting idea. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of idleness. I do tend to think of it in terms of rest, but you're right, that kind of being quiet for the enjoyment of being quiet as opposed to preparing for the next battle. But there is a gallery here in Edinburgh called Embassy. It's an artist-run space, and they're doing something quite interesting at the moment, which is a kind of a retrenchment, where they had this show called The Rich Composter before, which was kind of looking back at actually what are all the things that we've done in the past and learn from and things, and that in itself, like, it's not always about like always moving forward to the next thing. Sometimes it's about having space to reflect on what you've got, and to kind of be present in it. And they're moving to a model where they are actually putting out less, so they're doing fewer shows, but they are doing them better. They are taking more time over them. They are building in longer time scales to allow the people involved to rest, and I am really excited about that. I think that's a really like one to watch to see how that works out for them, because the pressure in the arts is always like, as you say, where's the next commission coming from, where's the next thing coming from, what's the next exhibition that I'm gonna do, and the fact that they've built in the idea of that reflective period as part of the model, I think is really nice. So there you go, Embassy. They're here in Edinburgh. Do check them out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zipporah. And thank you, everyone. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but thank you so much, everyone, for your energy and your time. I think we've explored lots of really nice ideas around this jump between access work as a kind of, we're thinking about the practicalities of access, but also access as a practice. And I think maybe there's a lot more conversations to be had around that. So I'd like to thank Healing Justice London. I'd like to thank Kaya, Sohei, and Zipporah for your time. And just thank all the lovely BSL interpreters, Bo, our live captioner, Rainbow Collective, for all the tech work, and thank you all for being here online and in person. And we can continue the conversation afterwards, and maybe we'll find another time to do this again. All right, thank you, everyone.